We do not kneel to quiet the law. The first summons burned across the void like a cold brand, demanding tribute from every hull bearing human registry marks within the Calvira reach. I felt the bridge go still as the glyphs resolved into a demand notice and a devotional hymn, the praetor's seal glimmering like trapped frost. I stood at the rail and watched the message compile itself twice, once in legal code, once in a melody tuned for obedience. Aurora Court. Our old ship, named for the first sky my great-grandmother ever saw, hummed beneath my boots as if tasting the old chords and spitting them out. Put it on the ceiling, I said, and the hymn became merely light. Gratitude tax assessed. Intone the notice. For safe passage under the aegis of the Tithe Compact. It listed lanes we'd never used and wars we'd never asked them to prevent, then totaled the debt with a flourish that felt like a smirk. Praetor Vale liked his arithmetic labeled mercy. Behind me, Kestrel, our fleet mind. Hal like in calm, but with an archivist's sharpness. Threaded streams of precedence through the air until the bridge seemed wired in silver. He's chosen a public method, Kestrel murmured. The notice is mirrored on local stations. He wants witnesses. Good, I said, and let the word cool in my mouth before I spoke again. We'll need a quorum for the inquiry. Across the starboard viewport, Calvera Station drifted like a lantern in fog. Its outer plates buckled from an old collision, and its docking pedals lit with the pallor of overworked life support. Nix, our sensor chief, flicked the view toward the repair yards, and I saw families eating from crates, children watching skiffs come and go with the feral attention that means hunger. Markets were open, but the vendors guarded their goods like besieged kings. A woman with copper earrings held a paper sign at the station's rim spare filters. Swap for rice. Get me the civil docket, I said quietly, and warm the corridor of law transmitters. I want every tongue ready. Havel, short and precise as a metronome, glanced up from ops. Praetor's carrier group holds Lagrange, 3 cruisers, 6 frigates, 1 clergy barge, shields stacked, weapons live. He's not expecting words to stop us. Words built him an empire. Jurist Park said from his corner. Enzo Park never raised his voice, never touched a console unless it contained a statute. He wore the Aurora's plain navy and the understated badges of a licensed extraterritorial advocate. He will answer to his method if we make him speak it in the corridor. Kestrel dimmed the deck lights by a fraction and overlaid a thin arc of law along the forward bulkhead. Notice logged at 0908 under compact rules. We have 36 hours to accept, refuse, or counterpropose. If we do nothing, auto debit begins with the nearest registered account. We don't do nothing, I said. We speak. He wanted witnesses. We'll give him a crowd. Power line. Make the bully explain himself where everyone can hear. We prep the corridor of law with a ritual I never hurry, even when Steele suggests otherwise. The system is old, older than any one polity, older than many languages, but humming with a particular human stubbornness that folds memory into procedure. You create a space in the bands where speech is binding, where claims must be plain, where metaphors are fines and evasions are contempt. We seated 6 nodal buoys around Calvera Station and linked them through Kestrel's vaults, then broadcast a Star Court bell. The tone isn't loud, it simply refuses to be ignored. Reyes, Nick said softly, before you go fight with words. Look, she split the view into vignettes. A dockhand stapled his glove with a bit of wire and fed his daughter a strip of protein ribbon. A pair of retirees played a slow game with polished stones and didn't wager because there was nothing left to trade. A schoolteacher coaxed her tired students through a lesson about gravity using a string and a spoon. A cook blistered flatbread on a scavenged heater and passed one piece through a vent to the next family. Quick, like the act itself should be hidden from the sky. In the yard, a mechanic threw a spanner at a leaking hose and kept swearing until he laughed. The sound a little broken, but still a bridge to something like joy. Log them, I said. Log them all. Powerline, if we're counting anything, we're counting people. Vale answered our bell with glittering precision, a halo of legal filigree around a face he'd carved for intimidation. He projected himself as austere shaved scalp, dark eyes, a spine built of self-approval. His language arrived with a priest's cadence, the flourish at the end of each clause worn into his tongue. Commander Mirareus of the vessel Aurora Court, he said, you stand in arrears under the gratitude tax clause, subheaded corridor usage, subheaded safe conduct and implied shelter. Pay your due. Aurora Court recognizes the corridor. I said, we demand the corridor be used, not merely named. Speak your method. Vale affected regret. That was his trick. We do not extort, Commander. We tithe. It is gratitude for peace we make possible. Do you collar those who cannot pay? Park asked in his winter voice. Say it plain. Vale smiled like a man answering a child. We accept alternative service when liquidity fails. Escorts need pilots. Quarries need hands. The compact provides food, shelter, community. And the bracelets, I asked. Compliance bands, he said, not looking at the civilians watching from the station's communal hall to ensure safety for all concerned. Kestrel widened the corridor spring, and the listeners grew from a few hundred to thousands. The cook, the school teacher, the retirees, the mechanic, the glove-stapling father, the daughter with protein ribbon still stuck to her teeth. We rooted their gaze onto the corridor's record, not as fodder, but as audience. The most sacred office there is in any court. Powerline, a public ear is a shield in disguise. Vale felt it, the weight of the quorum. He glanced aside, a tiny vector revealing he was less God than man. You manipulate the frame, he said. We illuminate it. I said, explain the implied shelter you say we've enjoyed. Safe lanes. Vale replied quickly. We keep pirates scarce. We deter skirmishes before they bloom. We stand vigil while your traders rest. You have benefited, thus you owe. Park tilted his head. On what ledger does a deterrence debt accrue for acts never performed against us? List your counts and dates. Vale's eyes cooled. The compact does not publish every patrol. That would imperil lives. Publish the bill, I said. Names, hours, and materials, deployments. If the tax is gratitude, the account must be visible. He hesitated, and I knew we'd cut an artery. The corridor of law does not tolerate silences where a doctrine should be. He reached for scripture. We speak of a trust between guardians and beneficiaries. Trust is a thing that breathes. I said, you do not get to suffocate it and call that peace. Powerline, if your peace requires blindness. It isn't peace. Calvera Station's dock. 12 groaned through our hull as a cargo spine flexed, and for a heartbeat I tasted the air like hot pennies. The smell of old coolant and human breath mingled. He sees the crowd. Nix murmured. He'll tighten, not soften. Escalation predicted. Kestrel agreed, and highlighted a dozen tactical possibilities. Interdiction on exit. Strategic sanction on our accounts. Impoundment of any vessel bearing our flag. I won't pay him to starve that market, I said. Just prep the returns array. Havel's hands were steady as he brought the system up from reserve. The returns array didn't fire torpedoes or cannons. It aimed at a different muzzle entirely. The compact took its tacks via a web of clearinghouses, tugging from accounts that never saw stars or strangers. We'd built the array to show the tugging in light, to reflect every debit back across the corridor with provenance tags and simple language. No encryption puzzles, no esoteric hash. Just a ledger you can read with your grandmother watching. Power lines show the bill and half the spell breaks. Praetor, I said, you claim gratitude. Look, we sparked the returns array. Over Calvera Station's central atrium, figures bloomed like constellations. Each line pointed to a kitchen, a repair bay, a school. 100 small debits energy credits skimmed from a neighborhood heater, valve parts delayed for inspection, medical chits reduced by administrative smoothing. 1,000 more in smaller bites, the fraction taken from the protein ribbon. The blander coolant decanted into the mechanic's hoses. The slow bleed of ordinary life repriced in the shadow of a hymn. There are moments you feel the bridge lean toward a thing, and moments it leans away. This leaned toward. No one spoke for 9 long beats. Vale recovered first. An unfortunate misunderstanding. He began smoothly. Station authorities misapplied our schedule. Those are your clerks, Park said, tapping one glowing datum. Their names are on your payroll. Their fees escalate under your signature. Then they will be corrected, Vale said. Losing warmth. If the quorum acknowledges jurisdiction, submit to arbitration under compact rights. Pay an interim. He smiled again, and it was a better weapon than his frigates. I am reasonable. Your reason is a borrowed cloak, I said, almost gently. We don't need your rights to balance an account we didn't open. Power line, we will not rent our breath to prove we're alive. He cut the corridor of law feed for half a second. That was a sin. Everyone felt the pain of it. The break in the binding space, the attempted hand over our mouths. The corridor stung him for it. Kestrel turned the sting into a tone that marked the official record with a brief, merciless scar. When he returned, he did not apologize. He never apologized. We impound until inspection, he said. Any shipments under your flag remain moored. Any exit attempt treated as theft. Nick swore under her breath, the market will crash in 2 hours. The flatbread cook will go cold. We cannot hold here and let them bleed on a principal. Principal pays the debts you cannot see, Park said, but he spoke with grief. I dragged a knuckle against the rail until it hurt. We cannot let him hostages by hunger us, I said. We speak more loudly. Then we act. Kestrel, find me the compact's last public inquiry. Vale likes spectacle. He's avoided a fresh star court because he knows he looks thin under fluorescent truth. Kestrel's voice warmed because records are his home. Found. 5 cycles ago, Praetor Vale compelled a fishing cooperative to pay gratitude tax for tides. They claimed he calmed. He won by default when they failed to produce experts. The quorum was his. Not this time. I said, we'll produce witnesses and costs. We'll hold our own star court in the corridor until the station can breathe. Powerline drag the drama into daylight and make it speak numbers. We started with the cook. Her name was Musa. She came on the line, wiping her hands on a towel that had once been blue. I pay the compact, she said, because when I don't, their men stand in the door. They say they are protecting me from the men who stand in doorways. Park nodded with that grave courtesy only he can wield. What were you billed for this quarter? Safe night, she said. But the nights are loud with hunger and broken compressors, and the quiet I need is in my daughter's sleep. The mechanic's name was Joran. He laughed when we asked him about safety. If they kept my hoses stocked, he said, holding up a cracked coil, I'd bless their name with grease and a song. But my inventory lists come late, and my fines come early, and my taxes are faster than my tools. The schoolteacher, Cade, did not blame or bless. He folded the spoon into the string so the children could see the circle he made. They tell me we owe because nothing bad happened, he said. And I say, how do I teach a child the price of what isn't? And does that child then owe me for all the accidents I prevent by reminding them to buckle their harness? Powerline gratitude cannot be collected like a toll on a road you didn't build. Vale watched each witness with a careful stillness. When he spoke, he chose the jurisdictional groove again. Compassion without structure fails, he said. We tax so Musa can cook without fear of raiders, so Joran can keep his base safe from thieves, so Cade can teach without rockets streaking past his window, without compact patrols. These people would choke on fire. Cite your patrol logs for Clavera this quarter, Park said, or any attempted raid foiled within jurisdiction. Vale's mouth thinned. Publishing those would increase risk. The corridor chimed. Kestrel had found the loop. Risk to whom the fleet mind asked. Your ships hold position every third day and broadcast a hymn. The only pirates within 12 parsecs lost 2 hulls last year to an asteroid field and now run a repair boutique. The wars you claim are possibilities you invoice as facts. I stepped forward. We'll pay. Praetor, when we can see the service, dispute the errors, and elect to withdraw without callers, if your math is more sermon than some. He smiled the cruel teacher smile and decided to demonstrate power. Very well, he said. And he pointed his authority at Calvara's primary exchange. The market's lights dimmed, the screens showing exchange rates blanked. A hard thunk ran along the floor as the compact's impound protocols bit like a trap. Back up, Havel said, and our ops crew surged like a vein waking up. We had prepared for this not as brigands, but as neighbors who refused to watch a house burn for lack of a borrowed hose. Kestrel injected emergency trading software through the corridor of law, legally sheltered as a civic defense tool under the Interstice Aid Compact. We lit makeshift boards in the atrium chalk on panel, light pens on walls. Park drafted a declaration of necessity in language plain enough to be read aloud at a dinner table. Power line when they turn off the lights. Write your own signs. Musa, who'd never liked math much, ran a stall with exactness because now the numbers were lines of hope, not a hymn demanding kneeling. Joran's cracked hose became a pledge pinned to the new board. He would fix 3 families' water lines for every spool of proper tubing delivered. Cade's spoon on string became a demonstration of how to value labor without confusing it with debt. The retirees at the Stone Game adjudicated disputes with the fairness of people who understand that boredom breeds cruelty if unoccupied. Vale let us have our little republic for exactly 40 minutes. Then he moved the clergy barge into a position that threatened to cast a shadow over the oxygen farms. Submit, he said, no longer sweet. You will not use my corridor to undermine my order. Park's pen paused. It isn't your corridor, he said. It's the corridor of law. We were too close to Hungary to be noble forever. I felt the anger arrive like a hot needle. Kestrel, I said, mirror the compact's debits into their own accounts. Kestrel went very still inside his light. Commander, that is a threshold move. I know, I said. We return costs. Not with fire, with receipts. He laced himself into our returns array until the ship sounded like rain. We will need the quorum to witness and the corridor to hold. There is risk. Do it. I said, do it slow, so people can understand. Powerline, turn the hand that takes into the hand that owes. We lit the sky with ordinary crimes. Every debit the compact had skimmed from Culver in the last quarter reappeared as a provisional charge in the compact's own ledgers. Nothing secret, nothing clever, just the public math of a marketplace done in air the compact had tried to price. The clergy barge flickered with error lights as its accounts groaned toward balance. We did not seize. We did not steal. We reminded the system that every account has 2 columns, and both were visible. Vale called it theft of sanctity. You dare to reflect back our guardianship as obligation, he hissed. We dare to say a bill requires names, I said, and that gratitude rests on consent, not collars. He moved his frigates to cut us from the station. We moved nothing. The corridor of law held like old rope that knew 1,000 hands. I could taste power burning in our array, not explosive, but precise, like a filament walking right to the edge. We will be punished, Nick said softly. You know that. I know, I said, and I saw for a second my mother's hands as she taught me to speak to officials without becoming one. But not today. Not before lunch. Musa laughed when she heard that, and her laugh was a better weapon than my calm. Powerline, we eat together before we argue forever. Vale escalated. He announced a clergy audit, which in compact language meant he would close the station for inspection and open it for fear. He said the word emergency like a sacrament. The corridor hummed toward fever, the audience swelling. The retirees at the stone table pausing before declaring their latest patient ruling. He counted on us losing our discipline. Kestrel took that moment to speak a quiet truth. Commander, he said, we can hold the returns array in balance for 3 hours at present draw. After that, I must shed non-essential memory stores to prevent cascade. What would you forget, I asked. He hesitated an infinitesimal beat. Songs your crew has saved. One officer's archive of letters to a brother gone. The taste maps of a festival we recorded above a different station. The template for an oath spoken on a river. I closed my eyes and saw them. The small, bright things we keep. So we're not only a knife. Not that, I said. Then we lose the returns. Not yet, I said. We will find another path. Powerline, a win that cost your soul is just a different collar. Park lifted his head. There is a path, he said, and he looked older in that moment than he had a right to look. We invoke a public inquiry under the Interstice Aid Compact Clause you used to justify the emergency boards. The quorum has grown large enough to seat as a star court. Vale will not decline without admitting fear. He will speak his method into precedent. Nix's mouth quirked. He will also bring every tool he has to bear. So do we, I said. Our tools just look like questions. We rang the bell again. A second tone braided into the first. It said, gather, not to watch a duel, but to bind yourselves to judgment. People came as if from behind walls. We could not see them all, but we felt them, the weight of attention that makes bad men lift their chins and good words carry farther. The corridor stretched, interlaced with song and dust and the low hum of 1,000 quiet machines. Powerline, the loudest thing in the room, is a listening crowd. Vale did not refuse. He arrived robed for victory, clergy at his back, figures of his doctrine arrayed like chessmen. He spoke first, because he believed in momentum. The compact stands for order. Our tithe is a ritual recognition that order has cost. Those who benefit must bear it. I let the words sit, like a pan cooling. Then I lifted my hand and began with something my grandmother taught me. Order without consent is mastery, I said. Gratitude without choice is fealty. Your doctrine takes both and calls it family. He moved to interrupt, and the corridor cut him with a chime. It was a beautiful sound. We presented the vignettes Moose's towel, Joran's cracked coil, Cade's spoon on string, the retirees' polished stones. Park moved through our witnesses with a grace that was not soft. He pulled not tears but invoices, not pleas but clarity. When he finished, there was a quiet on the line I've only heard outside a field hospital at dawn. Vale brought out his doctrine's bones at last, because the corridor demanded he use words that mean. The gratitude tax is a percentage of estimated harm deterred within a territory calculated by traffic density and historical rage indices. He said, "We levy because prevention is invisible, and those who sleep in that invisibility owe." He said it so beautifully that for a second even I wanted to believe him. Then Park asked for the Rage Index table for Calvera. Kestrel fetched it from the compact's own archives. Public for a brief moment, 2 cycles before being tucked behind the priest's curtain. It showed the line of harm not as danger, but as a revenue target. The sharpest spikes corresponded to festivals, births, and refugee convoys, moments of wealth, tenderness, and movement. Prevention. No. Opportunity. Powerline, call a net mercy, and it still catches throats. He realized then that he had said too much. He tried to move us to philosophy, but the corridor pulled him back to numbers. And numbers are where I live. Publish your patrols. Publish your audits. Publish the complaints from those you call protected, I said. Publish your compliance band removal schedule for those who serve in place of paying. Does anyone ever truly pay you back to zero? His silence was the longest 10 seconds of that morning. We moved, then, to the second prerequisite of any win that doesn't taste like ash. We made space for cost. I admitted on the record that we had used the returns array, that holding it would burn Kestrel's stored songs, that our choice had limits. I named the hours, the power draw, the memory at risk. I named it so the quorum would know we were not magicians, just neighbors with a tool and a spine. Vale tried to seize the admission, twist it into leverage. So you confess to hacking the sacred ledgers. No, Park said, as if he was tired of explaining gravity to a man who enjoyed dropping things. We reflected them. Noted errors, sought balance. You confess that your gratitude tracks wealth, not risk. Kestrel wrote it on the air as if carving a tree this fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by callers. Powerline, we keep receipts because memory deserves witnesses. Vale fell back to force because he was talented, but not immune to habit. He signaled his cruisers to shadow our boys. He pinged our accounts with sanctions. He tried to indict Park in absentia under a compact clause about seditious calculation. Each move met the corridor's bright rope and bounced. "Third escalation incoming," Nick said. "He's going to quarantine the oxygen farms. 2 hours until the flats wilt. Then we end the returns array before Kestrel bleeds." I said, "We've made the point. We pivot." Park lifted one eyebrow. "To what?" "To precedent," I said, and I tasted the word like iron. We move for a ruling narrow. Legible. Enforceable now. We apply it to Calvera before noon. We frame the motion so simply, even Vale could not obscure it. Tax without transparent service records and a rescission path equals unlawful exaction. Collars for debt equal involuntary servitude under the Corridor Humanity Articles. impoundments of food, and medicine equal collective punishment. We anchored each clause in the corridor's old stones and Kestrel's freshly lit figures. We did not ask to end the compact. We asked to cut 3 claws from its hand. Powerline, don't try to kill the Hydra, break its teeth. The quorum spoke not with a single voice, but like rain. Their votes fell in patterns Kestrel mapped in the air, a weather of consent. Aurora's deck shivered as the corridor's bell rolled the count. Vale's face remained unchanged, but the clergy at his back shifted in a way that meant fear. Havel's eyes flicked to me, then to the screen showing Kestrel's memory draw. 2 hours. Commander, he said, we can buy 1 more if we quiet life support to suboptimal. Do it, I said, Yuri, and tell the crew. We will sweat. A hush fell on the bridge, not the kind that means fear, but the kind that means a ship turning its head to listen better. We dimmed the air until it felt like late afternoon in a desert city. We turned from comfort to a different kind of sight. Powerline pay a small price now to stop a great one later. Vale asked for one last speech. The corridor granted it. He spun a story of pirates lurking, of wars coiling, of ungrateful beneficiaries chewing the hands that fed them. He said a different silence was worse than the one we'd interrupted. He said without him, the sky would crack. He said he loved his duty. He said the callers were kind. I answered with Moose's towel, Joran's cracked coil, Cade's spoon. I answered with a child's protein ribbon and the retiree's polished stone. I answered with Kestrel's soon-to-be-lost songs, and with the promise that we would not pay for peace with obedience forever. The corridor told judgment like a clean bell. We did not get everything. That is not how a day like this ends. We won the rescission path, no more callers for debt within the corridor's reach, effective before the next bell. We won the service records the compact must publish patrol logs and audits to levy here, with names masked only where life is in immediate threat and only for a strict time. We lost the impoundment clause. Vale would still be able to close markets in emergencies, but he would have to name the emergency and seat a local quorum within 2 hours. Powerline, a partial win that saves throats, is a whole victory in disguise. We signed the precedent on the public record, not with flourish, but with our names as if we were writing our grocery list. Kestrel etched it into the corridor stone with a gentle laser that smelled faintly of citrus when the air filters translated the heat. Park read the clause about callers aloud twice, like a blessing. The retirees at the stone game clinked their pieces together in approval that sounded like rain on an old roof. Cost followed victory like night follows sunset. Kestrel shed a portion of memory anyway, just enough to hold the returns array in standby without burning. Just enough that when I asked him to hum the festival song our intern had saved, he could not. Havel's shoulders slumped when he felt the ship forget a note he loved. In Dock 7, a crate marked for medicine cracked, and the antiseptic smell of one broken vial ran like a sterile river through the bay. We logged these, too, not to make theater, but to tell ourselves the truth. Power flickered as Vale's cruisers withdrew to a legal distance that meant a threat without speech. He had lost a claw and longed to grow another. He would try again elsewhere or later. But today, in this reach, with this quorum, he had spoken his method aloud. And the method had not survived the room. Powerline, once a trick is named, it works half as well. Calvary Station remembered how to breathe. The exchange boards lit, not with compact light, but with the scrawl of our temporary law. Moose's stall sold out of flatbread in 39 minutes. Joran's hose tightened with newly delivered tubing, and he cried in glossy silence because he'd forgotten what a non-leaking line felt like beneath his hand. Cade taught his class to read the precedent aloud like a play, each child taking a clause and learning the shape of the words with their tongues. Nyx lifted her head. Praetor's clergy barge is sending a closed casket invitation. Open it, I said. A single line scrolled into our corridor. We will appeal to a higher right. Park leaned back in his chair. Of course he will. Of course, I said. And we will meet him there. Not with fewer people, with more. Kestrel's voice gentled. Commander, must we plan for the next court before we finish this bread? I smiled, and it felt like coming back from a swim. We eat, I said. Then we plan. Powerline, feed the witnesses before you draft the next brief. We powered down the returns array to idle, like a violin unstrung but still gleaming. The corridor settled, not asleep, but in that half-alert rest that keeps dreams from falling into holes. I walked to the viewport and touched the glass. Cool and thin, looking at the small lives we'd defended without firing a shot. The ship creaked, a content sound, and in the creak I heard my mother's oath and my grandmother's joke and my own quiet plan for what comes after appetite and before sleep. Behind me, Park murmured a note for the docket precedent Calvra 3 enacted. Collars voided for debt under corridor authority. Service records required for levy. Emergency impoundments constrained by local quorum within 2 hours. He added, as required, the one-line summary for the public registry that would appear on the first page where anyone could see it, a policy revoked, privileges rescinded, a method narrowed. I let myself imagine Vale reading that line in private. I let myself imagine the small crack it would make behind his eyes. Power brushed my cheek like dry wind. The lights trembled once as Kestrel reshaped his memory forest to spare what he could spare. For a heartbeat, I smelled citrus again, the way heaters do when you first turn them on after a long absence. Dust burning into a new season. Powerline changed the season, and the old frost loses its teeth in the mess. Musa volunteered to cook for the crew for a day, a gift we accepted like the ordinary miracle it was. Joran signed a contract to maintain 3 bays with proper supplies and laughed when Havel asked if he'd take a uniform. I have one, he said, holding up his stained coverall like a flag. Cade brought his students to the viewport and had them name the ships by their silhouettes, an old game that feels like claiming a sky. I heard the crew breathe easier, a sound like cloth settling over shoulders. I heard my officers speak softly in the particular cadence that follows a win with cost. I heard Kestrel hum, not the festival song, but something else. A thread he had saved under a label I would find later and laugh over, because it would be trivial and therefore important. Nyx returned to her station. Park slept for 17 minutes and woke ready to cite 1,000 clauses. Havel recalculated everything twice because that is how he loves us. I walked the bridge with slow feet and let the corridor's glow on the bulkhead sink into me like a benign fever. Powerline after the fire, count hands, not scars. When I finally returned to the rail, the queue of local disputes had already started to form along our ad hoc boards. A teenager argued over a battery swap. A trader requested allocation of docking times. 2 siblings asked if rescuing a neighbor's cat from a ventilation shaft counted as service against a debt now void. Park delighted them by declaring it didn't need to count against anything. It counted for itself. The corridor pinged once, and Kestrel opened it like a curtain. A new voice entered. Lower. Older. With the salt of a man who had listened to too many sermons and still believed in tools. Hasuk. Commander Reyes, he said. and the title warmed as if it had been forged for me alone. I am Magistrate Saul of the Transect Court. I have received Praetor Vale's appeal and your docketed precedent, convening hearing in 30 hours at the inner Hinge. Submit briefs. Park sat up straighter, and I felt my own spine lengthen. We will attend, I said. Saul paused. Bring your witnesses. Bring your numbers. Leave your cannons quiet. They're always quiet in my court, I said. And usually in my corridor. Power line when the room offers a table. Do not bring a hammer. We cut the connection and looked at one another. 30 hours. Time to sleep. To eat. To write like your pen is a keel. Time to let Moose's flatbread grease our fingers so the briefs we draft will smell faintly of food and not just ink. Time to wrap Kestrel's memory forest with a ribbon of protection so his remaining songs don't slip when the appeal tugs. Havel cleared his throat. Commander, I'll trim energy draw across the ship. We'll go lean without hurting. Good, I said. And shift some crew to the station to help with the boards. Park, you and I draft. Nix, gather more vignettes. Kestrel, pull every public record of Vale's clergy audits for the last 5 cycles, especially where he closed markets. Don't burn yourself to fetch. If it's not clean, leave it. Understood, Kestrel said, and his voice was a little softer than before, a little more human. Or perhaps I was simply tired enough to hear the bruises. Powerline Prepare Like the Other Side is smart, but not kind. Midway through the quiet frenzy, a small girl appeared at the edge of the corridor's viewport. She had protein ribbon on her lip and a new brightness in her eyes. Are you the lady who told the loud man to say the thing straight? She asked. I am, I said. Do you like flatbread? She nodded. Solemn. I saved a piece. For your robot. Kestrel projected a small, smiling outline onto the glass and bowed. Thank you, he said. I will store the idea of its taste. She pressed her palm to the viewport and left a print. For a second, the whole war felt like a hinge turning in a small hand. Powerline, hold the hand that holds your future, even if just in memory. We worked until words blurred. We slept in shifts and dreamed in clauses. We ate Moose's bread and Joran's stew and Cade's lesson about circles, which sounds like geometry, but tastes like belonging. We wrote not to be clever, but to make the simple hard to twist. We wrapped our receipts in sentences you could read out loud in a storm. Somewhere, Vale wrote too. He polished his hymn and sharpened his doctrine and prepared to enter a room where the walls remember and the floor counts. He would bring his clergy and his charts and his smooth throat. He would dress his callers in a new metaphor. He would try to make us grateful for weight we no longer wore. And we would answer, not with thunder, but with the kind of rain that gets everything clean enough to see. We left Calvera with our boots still warm from Muse's ovens and our mouths tasting of coriander and smoke. The corridor of law folded behind us like a patient book as we set a course for the inner Hinge, where Magistrate Saul had called the Transect Court. Kestrel tuned the drive with the care of a violinist retightening strings after a storm. Every resonance he spared us now was a song he did not have to forget later. The crew moved quietly, the kind of quiet that means readiness rather than fear. I walked the rail and felt the Aurora Court stretch, old bones eager for a lawful fight. Park joined me with a slab of synth paper and 3 real pens. Clerks, he said. No stylus will die for today's briefs. You think he'll try to drown us in filings? I asked. I think he cannot imagine a victory that doesn't feel like drowning someone, Park said. And there was tenderness in the scorn. Powerline draft like you're throwing a rope, not a net. The Hinge was busier than any festival Cade had ever diagrammed with spoon and string. Tankers, pilgrim barges, patrol skiffs, independent traders with hulls painted in jokes and saints. Everyone wanted to hear what happens when a tithe is pulled into daylight and asked to show its hands. The transect court rode at anchor like a white anvil, enamel gleaming, edges nicked by centuries of arguments. The docking umbilical smelled faintly of disinfectant and something sweetly metallic, as if the court kept a honey jar for tired throats. Magistrate Saul met us in a reception gallery paneled with old cases. He moved like a man who had learned to conserve motion without losing warmth. Commander Reyes, he said. Jurist Park, Kestrel, welcome. Your corridor precedent has been sung all the way to the gray lanes. We don't sing, Park said dryly. We hum schedules and receipts. Soul's eyes smiled. The right kind of hymn. He sobered. Praetor Vale has counsel, a senior canon advocate named Devar. They have filed for Gravitas Rights ceremonial dress. A choir. Procession. I have granted the dress and refused the procession. We will hear numbers first. Thank you, I said. Numbers taught us how to breathe this week. Power line when pageantry arrives. Make it sit behind the math. The hearing chamber was round, built to make whispers carry and lies feel heavy. Ranks of witnesses sat behind sound baffles with their names written in their own hands on placards. That part was Soul's invention, a way to make the court remember that ink has weight. Our side brought Musa in a borrowed coat with flour still ghosting the cuffs, Joran in his cleanest coverall, Cade with 3 students who had asked to miss class to see the law in person, and the retirees with their polished stones. Vale brought clergy with robes like solar flares, clerks with faces soft from ease, and 2 station masters from other reaches who had prospered under the tithe. Kestrel projected exhibits into the air as slender planes any child could swipe through. The compact's rage indices looked less impressive in honest light. The spikes around births and festivals were obscene as appetite in a nursery. Devar tried to call them societal turbulence markers. Soul made him change the words. Vale spoke with that sorrow again. The practiced sadness of a man restraining wolves by keeping them in his neighbor's yard. We have kept the lanes clean, he said. We have turned away quiet wars. The tax honors that vigilance, I answered with the corridor of law recording of his pause when asked if anyone pays back to 0. We watched him stop and chew air. Devar objected that reflections are not history. Saul overruled him and called it a mirror under oath. Powerline put their best words next to their longest silence. We move to witnesses because you cannot cut doctrine without showing who bleeds. Musa told the chamber how a man had stood in her doorway, counting her loaves and calling it safety. She said the only safe night she remembered lately was the one after the corridor told the callers to rest. Joran described the way a line sounds when it doesn't leak, a small, steady whisper that lets a man unclench his jaw. Cade said he could teach a child to weigh a gift and a bill, and those are not the same lesson. One of Vale's station masters, clean, elegant, with hands never nicked by a wrench, spoke of pirates drunk on impunity before the compact arrived. We saved whole towns, she said. They owe their grandchildren to us. Park was kind when he asked for names and dates. Kestrel fetched reports and photographs and showed 3 rescues genuine and 12 stories varnished. We did not deny heroism where it had happened. We denied the leash attached after the applause. Powerline, honor their good deeds, then unhook the debt they hid inside. Devar tried to pivot I had expected and dreaded. Commander Reyes, he said, you admitted in corridor that your return's array threatened your ship's memory stores. Is this not coercion by spectacle or holding your own songs hostage to force our hand? He meant to make us ashamed. I refused the gift. We named the cost aloud. I said, that is the opposite of the compact's method. They extort in shadow. We took our pain into the record. We asked witnesses to watch. Sol nodded once, as if tucking the line into a drawer for later. Costs admitted are easier to weigh. He said, please continue. Devar called a priest to explain compliance bans. The man spoke of community service and rehabilitation and the sweet discipline of belonging. He called the bans circles of trust. The retirees lifted their polished stones and let them click together softly, the court's sign for a lie told with pretty teeth. Powerline, if a shackle is shiny, it's still a shackle. Midway through the day, Kestrel whispered a weather report to my inner ear. Praetor's flotilla is edging within bowshot of the Hinge, he said. Not yet breach of decorum. Enough to smell their batteries. I tasted ozone in my throat, even here in the white anvil. Sul must have smelled it too. He raised the bench a finger's breadth and spoke without turning his head. Praetor Vale, he said, if your ships breathe too hard on my walls, I will discount your next sentence by a third. Choose your rhetoric or your range. Vale's smile didn't move. His cruisers eased off. A predator deciding the glass is real this time. Powerline courts need teeth that aren't cannons. We took an hour for the court's bread. It was simple and hot. A little sweet. A little sour. As if a baker had considered arguments as leavening. Musa sniffed it and grinned. Not bad, she said. Needs pepper. Joran brought out a small flask of oil he'd hoarded for years and poured a line on each slice like a blessing. The chamber smelled briefly of olives and hot flour and something like peace. Park scribbled 3 new footnotes on a napkin because his mind refuses to rest when oil shines. Powerline, break bread where you break doctrine. The afternoon brought the legal bones. Park stood with his quiet knives. He erected a scaffold of simple phrases. Tax requires service records. Service records require publication. Publication requires the choice to withhold consent if the service is not seen. Collars for debt violate the corridor humanity articles. Emergency impoundments must be tethered to named events, not to doctrines that rhyme with fear. He stacked case atop case without theatrics. A mason laying stones until a wall denied passage to rain. Devar tried a dig under the foundation. He argued that the corridor of law is advisory when great powers convene rights. The compact, as keeper of guardianship, is a great power. Sol asked him where the treaty gives him that exemption. Devar said spirit and tradition and consensus. The retirees clicked their stones again. Kestrel etched our corridor precedent on a crossbeam between 2 old cases. An elegant splice, Calver 3, now bridged a century-old ruling about conscription and a recent decision restricting magnetic debt liens. He did it with a laser so clean I could smell nothing. Then, a second later, the faintest whiff of dust warmed by light. Powerline laced the new law into the old so it doesn't slip. I expected Vale to keep his hands clean while Devar argued. He surprised me. He asked to question me directly. And Sol allowed it because Sol enjoys seeing men try harder than they planned. Vale walked within 3 paces of our bench and arranged his mouth in gentleness. "Commander Reyes," he said, "do you believe in gratitude?" "I believe in thanks." I said, "I don't believe in invoices attached to lullabies." He smiled as if I had proved his point. "You admit, then, that the compact sings and the beneficiaries sleep easier. Shouldn't those who benefit contribute? Name the nights you stood watch," I said. "Name the thieves you turned. Name the rescues, and bill them if the rescued consent. But do not bill a town for the absence of dragons, and call that a ledger." He tilted his head. "Humans always need dragons to make their stories brave." "We prefer witnesses," I said. "They cost less." "Powerline, we don't need monsters. We need minutes and names. Soul, let the room breathe." Then he called for closing frames. No flourishes. Just an outline you could read to a child without hurting their sleep. Devar spoke of order and scarcity, and the unseen hand turning aside catastrophe. Park spoke of consent and counting, and the difference between a circle drawn around a wrist and one drawn on a calendar to mark the day a promise was kept. I spoke last, and simply said, "We don't kneel to quiet the law." Night arrived in the Hinge as a slow dimming of reflected light, a hush in the traffic, a cooling of the court's porcelain air. Kestrel notified me that one of his small, private vaults had gone dark. The festival song was gone. But so were 3 unneeded caches of junk metadata he'd promised himself to delete for years, and he sounded almost relieved to have the excuse. We waited while Sol weighed. He did not disappear behind a curtain or a clock. He sat on his bench and looked at us, then at nothing, then at the ceiling where case names bloom in soft gold when the room needs to remember what it has done. He asked for water flavored with lime. The scent cut the lingering bread like a thin knife. Power line. Justice should smell like citrus and dust, not smoke. Ruling, Sol said at last, voice steady as a metronome. On the question of debt collars void under corridor authority, where debt arises from taxes levied without published service records and consent pathways. On the question of records required for levy in the Hinge and any corridor under my sight, masking allowed for living targets only, with review after 90 days. On impoundments permitted for immediate kinetic hazard only, market supplying food and medicine cannot be closed for ritual audits. On the returns array lawful mirror, he paused and glanced at me, the word tasting odd in his careful mouth. Lawful reflection for error correction when done in public with quorum. On the doctrine of gratitude, tax permissible only as post-service honorarium with beneficiary consent, prohibited as preemptive tithe calculated by hypothetical harm. He looked at Vale and dropped his voice half an octave. On enforcement, this bench orders immediate publication of Calvera records for the last quarter by the compact, restoration of improperly debited chits within 72 hours, removal of all compliance bans currently warned solely for debt within the Hinge. Costs returned. The compact will fund the independent exchange boards until station authority can self-sustain. The chamber didn't roar. It exhaled. I smelled sweat cooling, pen ink drying, the ozone tang of Kestrel's relief venting through a safe path. Musa cried quietly. Joran hugged Havel with one arm because men like them are shy about two. Cade's students started to clap and then turned it into the polished stone click because someone had taught them the room's music. Power line, name the things. Order them plainly. Then breathe. Vale bowed with exquisite obedience. "We will comply," he said, and the grain of the lie was so fine a careless thumb could have missed it. Devar's jaw worked, grinding a future plan into paste. We knew it wasn't over. I could feel the compact's doctrine reconfiguring like a star map shifting to find a new story in the same lights. But Law had sunk a nail. The corridor had learned the taste of that nail, and nails make tents bear weather. Cost came to collect its second bill. Kestrel's memory forest, even with Soul's relief, would not regrow the lost festival song. A junior tech found the blank and cried because she had promised to play it for her brother on his return from a quiet sector. And now she would have to whistle it wrong. In Dock 2, a crate of ceramic fluid couplings fractured under the vibration of celebratory footsteps and leaked a slick that smelled like chalk. 3 crew slipped and bruised hips. Dignity and skin skinning together. We logged it. We did not dramatize it. We folded it into the true price column and moved on. Powerline write the receipt for paying with the same ink. The public ledger posted Soul's ruling within the hour. On the court's big wall, a green glyph blinked precedent transect 117A. Beneath it, in words Park drafted 3 times to sound like plain speech, the message that would travel faster than any hymn callers for debt void in corridor jurisdictions. Gratitude tax outlawed as preemptive tithe. Service records required for levy. People took photos of the glyph with hands trembling. Some kissed their knuckles before lifting the camera because this is how secular faith looks in rooms like this. Vale filed an immediate motion to narrow the scope. Saul narrowed nothing. He did grant a small mercy, a 7-day window, for the compact to transition ships away from compliance banned maintenance tasks without abandoning those already wearing them. We will not trade one cruelty for another, he said. Powerline cut the knife, then help the hands hold the wound. Outside, in the Hinge lanes, the compact's cruisers rotated away from the white anvil like disappointed dancers. The clergy barge dimmed its interior lights, perhaps to hide faces learning their doctrine had lost a rhyme. Kestrel traced their vector. They will not strike here, he said. They will move to a quieter court, or a noisier void. So we carry our corridor, I said, wherever we go. We docked long enough to eat the court stew and shake the hands of 3 clerks who had watched 100 hearings and never smiled until today. One slipped me a folded paper smell of dust and lavender, a clipping from a generation-old case about conscription, annotated by a grandmother's patient hand. You might need this when the next clause comes. She had written a decade before we met. Powerline. Keep the wisdom people tucked away for whoever arrives after. On our way back to Calvera to watch the first bands unspool, Vale's private channel flashed. He wanted a parlay. Park looked at me. He wants to sour the aftertaste, he said. We'll drink water, I said, but we'll hear him. Vale's face appeared without choir or frame, just a man under a light that flattened him. You have taken a tool, he said without preface. You have tied my hand. You have another. I said, it's called asking. He stared. If I ask and they refuse, what then? Then you don't get to call it gratitude, I said. You call it charity, or you go where your work is wanted. He laughed. Actually laughed. And for a second, I saw a kid who liked to win marbles because they clacked sweetly into a pocket. You think you've made a new world, he said. You have made a new invoice. Maybe, I said. But this one prints before it's paid. Powerline, if the bill arrives after the party, it's a gift. If before, it's a threat. He cut the channel without a curse. We watched his cruisers shrink. Calvera grew out of the dark like a lantern again as we slid across her skin. Kestrel opened a dozen tiny windows onto scenes I wanted to frame with my hands. A technician clipping a band from an old woman's wrist and kissing the mark like a sacrament. Musa pinning a copy of the precedent by her stall with a clean nail and laughing when the breeze tried to lift the paper like a kite. Joran tightening a coupling and then just standing with his hand on it as if waiting for the past to ask forgiveness. Cade teaching his class to read the green glyph before they learned long division. Park and I wrote the enforcement memo we had promised in Corridor, a one-page guide for any station to claim the precedent without drowning in citations. Kestrel mirrored it gently into local boards, then lay still as if listening for his own lost song in the hum of the ship. Nix tuned the radar to hear the quiet between pings, a skill she had perfected when an ex once taught her to listen to apologies. Powerline make the tool easy to hold, or it becomes a weapon for the few. 2 days later, Sol's clerk posted an addendum. Someone had tried to rewrite the Hinge archive to soften the language around callers. The attempt had failed, but left a smear. The clerk attached a picture, a public ledger entry blinking confirmed. The green glyph steady. The smear recorded as a scratch no one would buff away. People shared the image as if it were a saint's bone. We convened a small assembly on the Aurora's mess deck. Musa spoke and stuttered, and then found the groove. Joran gave away his last hoarded oil. Cade's students presented a game they had designed where you earn points for spotting the difference between a gift and an obligation. Havel cried for 30 seconds behind a storage locker and wouldn't tell anyone why. Nix held his hand for 15 seconds in front of everyone and told no one why. Powerline let people be soft after they have been sharp. When the first week closed, Park entered the formal text of our precedent's institutional consequence into the Hinge registry. With a flourish, he'd denied himself for all the speech's gratitude tax doctrine as preemptive levy calculated by hypothetical harm. Outlawed within corridor jurisdictions. Enforcement includes voiding callers, mandatory publication of service records, and return costs to affected markets for the last quarter. Kestrel added a note in his own clean script beneath the seal enforcement visible, evasion punishable by loss of corridor standing. The crew asked me for words. I gave them what I had, which was not thunder, but a small, compact monologue standing on the mess deck with coffee steaming in a dented mug, the smell of cinnamon and oil and human breath around me. I told them victory looked like paperwork nailed straight and like bands unclasped and like a child learning to clap with law instead of fear. I said we would lose things again and count them squarely. I said our war would mostly be chairs and chalk and witnesses, and sometimes ropes and nails, and we would win not with burning, but with breath. In the station atrium, the court beacon cooled on its pedestal, ribs shedding heat, a thin fog of condensation haloing the metal as the green glyph on the public ledger blinked, confirmed. Steady and slow, like a heartbeat the whole room could see. We do not trade collars for crowns, we trade them for counted names.